Casual Birder podcast, a weekly podcast for people interested in the birds they find around them. I'm Susie Buttress. This week, I talked to Claire Boothby from the British Trust for Ornithology about feeding garden birds, feeder hygiene, and the BTO Garden Birdwatch. There are lots of different types of birdwatchers. Some are excited by seeing rarities or hard-to-find birds. Some take a strictly scientific view of collecting bird information. Some anthropomorphise birds, imagining human characteristics in the behaviours they see. And some just enjoy watching these feathered creatures flying or hopping about in the garden. Perhaps we all contain varying degrees of these different types. But whatever our primary reason for watching birds, many of us also like to attract them to our gardens by providing food for them. And at this time of year, when the weather turns much colder in the Northern Hemisphere, people who may not usually feed birds are often moved to start doing so. I've put out food for birds in my garden since I was a youngster. I saw it as a win-win situation. The birds got some food that they didn't have to work too hard to obtain, and I was able to see birds at a much closer range. In some locations, I've even been able to hand feed birds, and that has been the most breathtaking of experiences. However, I know that feeding birds can also lead to problems. Indiscriminate feeding of pigeons or gulls have led to large numbers congregating together and encourages aggression towards humans and other birds in the competition for the food. Providing food on a regular basis may help sick or weaker birds to survive a bit longer at times when natural food is scarce. But bringing birds together at a feeder may also encourage the spread of disease. I spoke with Claire Boothby, the Garden Birdwatch Development Officer at the British Trust for Ornithology. I wanted to know what the BTO's position was on feeding our garden birds, and what is best practice if we're going to do so. I jumped right in with the question that was uppermost in my mind. So Claire, is it okay to feed the birds in our gardens?
Yes, I mean, it's something that a lot of us like doing. So it's something that has become more and more popular in recent decades. In 2015, the Pet Food Manufacturers Association estimated that we spend £210 million on bird food a year. And it is something that brings a lot of people pleasure. A lot of people are doing it with the intention of helping the birds. And we do know that over the winter period, particularly when conditions can be quite harsh and it's very cold weather and they're expending a lot of energy keeping warm, that providing some kind of supplementary food can really help them. So we know from our research and our data that in years particularly where there's poor seed crop, for example, we get more birds coming into the gardens. Obviously, when it's frosty, during the Beast from the East, earlier this year, we had field flares flocking to the gardens, taking people's apples and berries from the gardens. So it can be very beneficial for the birds. But there is a question, and we do have to be responsible when we're putting out food. It's just worth knowing how to do that in the right way and how to minimise any risks that might pose.
So on that note then, if we could perhaps first talk about what is the right food to put out, what would we attract to the garden, and what things should we avoid? Well,
there's all sorts of different foods out there. I think if I just start with the things to avoid, just because it's in our minds, it's near Christmas, and I think a lot of people have in the past given dripping to the birds, or they've cooked their food. And they've used the fats in that. That actually isn't the best thing to use. And the reason being is it usually has meat juices in, and it can be quite bad for bacteria. It also has the opportunity of being quite salty if people have put salt on the meat. So salt isn't great for birds. And it's also quite a soft fat, which isn't very good for their feathers. Other things that I'd avoid. It's not really bad for birds, but bread I would try to either avoid or only put out small amounts. Quite empty calories. It's not the best food for them to be eating. But there are so many things that you can put out. So I was saying about apples. Apples are great for attracting the thrushes into your garden. Sunflower hearts are probably one of the more popular types of food. So they're a food that kind of came onto the market in the 1990s, and it's an incredibly popular food for the reason that so many birds go to them. And they're a real favourite of goldfinches, actually, which is a bird that many people have seen in their gardens when they didn't used to. So we've seen a huge increase in our goldfinch numbers in those visiting gardens. So sunflower hearts are a good one to attract in the birds. Fats at this time of year, so your fat products, your fat balls and your fat slabs, they can be really useful as well. And you might get the odd wintering blackcap, the odd great spotted woodpecker, the tits. So many birds will be coming to those, and because they've got such a high fat content, they're really good for seeing those birds through the winter.
That's amazing. And some of the birds you mentioned there, I'm sitting here thinking, yes, please come to my garden, because I'd love to see them. I was very lucky last year to get blackcaps in the garden nearly all winter. So that was wonderful. Nice. But I've never had a woodpecker in my garden, and I would so love to have that. There's two questions I'd like to ask you about the fat. So one of them was about taking dripping from the cooking and put that out, and you said best not to because of the reasons you said. What about blocks of suet for making our own fat? Is that the same thing? Is there something else we should be using?
No, that's actually that's not as bad. So the things that you want to avoid are things that have had meat juices in them, things that have had extra salt added into them, and things. So if they solidify, if they're solid, that is fine. When you get the soft fats, that they can just mess with the waterproofing.
Yeah. So if we had a block of fat, but that we used that as a base for adding things like seed and bird-friendly peanut butter, there's a bird-friendly type, isn't there, that you can mix in?
Yeah, well, again, without the salt.
Yeah, so that's okay. Okay, that's good. And the other question I've got is I've read quite a lot about the fat balls, and they often come in like netting bags. And I've seen mixed reviews about not using the netting because birds can get trapped in them. How much of that is an urban myth and how much of that is actual truth?
At the British Trust for Ornithology, we actually ask people not to use the netting, take the fat balls out of the netting, and the reason being is that the birds can get caught in that. So it's something that we always recommend now. Okay,
great. That's really helpful. You mentioned about the fat potentially could go rancid or could go off. Thinking about the foods that we have in our garden, I know in the past I've put out Niger seed trying to attract goldfinches, and it would be there for ages and ages and ages, and no one would ever touch it. And then eventually I went to check and found that it had just gone, there's white mould all over it, it's all clogged up. It's clearly a total waste of seed. Now, sometimes damp gets into the feeders. I'm guessing it's not good for the birds to eat food that's got mould on.
Yeah, so you're right about that. So any mouldy food just isn't a good idea. Isn't a good idea at all. One thing that we suggest, so it's not just Niger seed, although I have heard that a lot with Niger seed, but also peanuts. A lot of people say their peanuts aren't being touched, but they still want to keep some peanuts out there to attract a wider variety of birds. And what I would suggest is you actually put a very small amount out. So what you're really wanting is kind of a quick cycle of food going out. So if it's there for more than a few days, I would then want to replace the food that's within it. But it's interesting what you say about goldfinches, because we definitely have seen this shift. A lot of garden bird watchers are telling us, have told us this shift that the goldfinches used to go to the Niger seed, but they're going to the sunflower hearts in preference to that. And it's actually worth noting with goldfinches, because so many people love goldfinches. Other ways to attract them into your garden are things like leaving the seed heads on your lavender and your teasel and your burdock.
Yes, I'm very happy with that option, because it means I don't have to keep my garden quite as tidy as I might have to. But I've definitely noticed that, and even seeing them going to dandelion heads as well.
Yeah.
We have a fairly natural garden. But
that's always nice. Yeah, bullfinches are a nice one for taking taking dandelion.
Absolutely. And I've been so lucky to get bullfinches in my garden too. So in terms of keeping the feeders clean, well, I've got a variety of feeders in my garden. I've got the tube feeders, I've got some ground trays, and then occasionally I will scatter some food out. So things like apple cubes, or in the breeding season, I have put sort of small amounts of cheese out. Although I'm guessing you'd probably say cheese is not good because it might be salty.
Cheese is actually all right. Cheese is a good way of attracting birds like robins to a ground feeder. Yeah, they can be quite good. Again, it's got quite a nice amount of fat, so it's quite good for the winter months. Gives them a nice bit of energy. So yes, grated cheese can be useful.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, so sometimes a little bit of grated cheese, yes. They do very well, actually. So what else? So I know that you can buy things like antibacterial, I guess, sprays. And so what would you suggest in terms of how often to clean the feeders?
Yeah, so cleaning the feeders is a really important thing to do when you're feeding, when you're putting food out for the birds. So how often you do it will really depend on how many birds you have coming to your garden. So if you're in the nice position to have birds flocking to your feeders, obviously you want to do this more frequently. So I would say kind of every other week. That's a rough guide, but yeah, it depends how many birds you have coming to your feeders, but definitely on a regular basis. And you can get the disinfectants. So it's a mild disinfectant, and if you can use that, that is much better than just using water by itself. And then make sure you rinse it and leave it to dry. But there are other things that you can do to help the birds as well. So one of them is actually having, if you have a few smaller feeders in different areas of your garden, that can be quite good because the birds aren't all coming to one single feeding station. If you're able to rotate the feeding stations, so you're not getting a build-up of contaminants at the bottom of the feeder, providing fresh water every day is a good one, and remembering, hopefully quite regularly, give your bird bath a bit of a clean as well.
I've actually got a couple of different spots around the garden where I have water, so the starlings will go and empty the water out of the bird bath because once one decides to go and have a bath, they're all in there. So I've got a couple of plant sources around the garden as well, and those are quite easy to, especially now when we're getting to the point where there might be ice in the morning, they're really easy to just upturn and drop the ice out to fill with fresh water.
Yeah. Definitely something to remember for the winter, that water is also extremely important.
Yeah. Now, sometimes we do find sick birds in the garden, and I recently had 2 greenfinches in the garden that were clearly suffering from, what's the name of it?
It's trichomoniasis.
Thank you.
It's a shame. So since 2006, we've seen a lot of cases of the disease trichomoniasis, and it particularly affects greenfinches, although it has been found in a lot of other species as well. It's been known in pigeon and dove species for quite some time. It's often referred to as canker, but we've seen a 60% decline in our greenfinch population since then.
Yeah, so I hadn't had any problems for a long time. And then just this autumn, I had 2 birds that showed signs. So I did the advice of, well, I don't know if you want to tell me what the advice was, and hopefully I did the right thing.
So the disease, a lot of wild birds have natural diseases, but there's something to look out for in the garden and the feeders, particularly because the birds are coming into contact with one another. So it is a way of other birds becoming infected. So if you do see a bird with these symptoms, so the symptoms to look out for are lethargic, it being really fluffed up. They also look like they're having difficulty swallowing, and you'll often see them with quite messy bills where they've kind of got a bit of seed sticking to their bill, and they look quite obviously ill. If you see a bird like this, please do let us know. Report it to. The most important thing is to report it. And you can do that via www.gardenwildlifehealth.org. And that goes to a partnership between BTO, the Zoological Society of London, the RSPB and Frog Life. And the vets at the Zoological Society of London will have a look at your record, and that will be used for us to see how disease is impacting wild birds. In your garden, though, it would be really good if you were able to take away, just for a short period of time, take the food away, give the feeders a good clean, and look out for signs of disease. If after a few weeks you're not seeing any more signs of disease, no sick birds, you can start putting that food back out again, but just be vigilant there. Because what you're wanting is the birds to disperse, so they're not all congregating in that same area. Is that what you were doing?
I did. So I took all the feeders down. I mean, I was really sad to find it. There were two birds. One bird was much sicker than the other. And this is the dilemma, is what do you do with that bird in the garden that is not interested in flying away? As it happened, a magpie took it. The second bird had flown away. I couldn't find it. So I didn't feed for about 3 weeks. However, what I did do was put a small amount of food out each day, because we've currently, for the last 8 months, had a red-legged partridge visiting the garden.
Okay.
And I didn't want to suddenly take a food source away from that bird. So what I was doing was just leaving a small amount of seed out for that, so it was at least something. But everything else I cleared. And I'm currently back to just 2 feeders. So I did have 6 feeders around the garden. I've only got 2 out at the moment. And yeah, I've not seen any more signs, and I'm keeping a vigilant look because I'm doing the bird watch anyway, so I'm keeping an eye on things. But
fantastic, thank you.
Well, that's fine. But I'd gone probably about 6 years without seeing any signs, which was, pretty good, because we'd had that big period a while ago where, we lost a lot of the greenfinches. It's hard not to feed when you've been used to feeding, because you see the birds coming into the garden looking for the food. And I have to remember that what I'm giving is a supplement to their natural food.
Exactly.
Because you start to think they're your birds and you are the one that's... So you have to kind of separate yourself a little bit from it. But I'm thankful at the moment. I've not seen any further signs, so that's really good.
Oh, that's really positive. And should actually say that the website that I gave before is actually for all different types of disease in your garden wildlife. So if you're seeing any signs of illness, whether that's birds, whether that's amphibians and reptiles or mammals, please do report it to Garden Wildlife Health, so the vets can have a read, and they'll be able to tell you more about it.
To move on from the slightly sad side of things, to I mentioned there about the birdwatch, and that I had in the past. It turned out 2005 was when I was last doing the BTO Garden Birdwatch. Wow. So it's been a little while, but my records were still there. So it was very interesting to go back and see what the birds were when I first was doing the birdwatch. But I have restarted that since joining the BTO again. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what the birdwatch is and what you're trying to achieve through it, what you do with the results?
Yeah, of course. So the British Trust for Ornithology has a garden birdwatch survey. And in this survey, we look at garden birds year round. So it's a weekly survey that tells us which species are in gardens, but also the maximum numbers that people are seeing at any one time. And it's done across the UK. So we've got a really, really good picture of what is going on. So we've got long-term data. Our records go back to 1995, and we're able to see the trends across the year. It allows us to see not just the peaks and troughs throughout the year and how they're doing, but it allows us to get a very good early warning indication. For example, house sparrows declining was a really good use of the garden birdwatch data, so we could see that house sparrow numbers were falling. But it also does more than that. So we're now looking a lot at kind of feeding garden birds and what impact is that having? Is that having population level impacts? So I was saying before that goldfinches are on the up. Actually, they started to increase quite significantly around the time that Niger seed and sunflower hearts came onto the market. Is that our actions putting out food for the birds, is that actually having a population level impact on them? Things like the blackcap research. So we did a piece of research looking at migratory blackcaps. So it wasn't actually that long ago that you'd have only considered blackcaps a summer bird, a breeding bird in the UK, but they're now overwintering here. And the birds that are wintering here are actually coming from the continent. And we've done a bit of work to actually show that the places that you're likely to see them in the UK are in more suburban gardens, in places, and they're very strongly associated with gardens that are supplying sunflower hearts and fat products.
Oh, interesting.
So we're doing quite a bit of research. In general, we're wanting to see how birds are using gardens and how that's changing over time. And gardens are such an important resource for birds. So it's estimated that gardens make up an area of land larger in size than the county of Suffolk within the United Kingdom. So that is a large area for birds to utilise. And a lot of us now are becoming, I think, more wildlife conscious when we're gardening, and we want to see kind of how is that affecting the birds that are coming into the garden. Are we seeing these changes in community structure in gardens? And I think this question is only going to become more important with increasing urbanisation.
So what does the birdwatch involve?
It's really easy to do, actually. So if you enjoy watching your garden birds, then it's essentially we're asking you to do what you love doing and tell us about it. So every week we ask you to set aside a small amount of time, and the time that you spend is completely up to you, as long as it's reasonably consistent from week to week. And we ask, which species are you seeing coming to your garden, and what is the maximum number that you're seeing at one time? And it's as simple as that. And you can do it online, or you can, if you prefer, there are paper forms to fill in as well.
So I've got a couple of questions here.
Okay. Fire away.
I chose 8 o'clock till 8:30 every Saturday morning, just because I know that that's a day that I'm most likely to be able to be looking out. I'm looking out loads of times, but that's the time I thought I could consistently record.
Yeah.
That's quite handy that I chose that time, because now during the winter sunrise is later, so at least I've chosen a time of day when I can see actually into the garden. But I can't tell you, and I know I know that you just want to know what happens in that half hour, and over the year it will work its way out. I can't tell you how many times I've recorded between 8 and 8:30, and at 8:31 all the usual birds have turned up in the garden, and I've just finished the survey. And it's like, I wanted to tell you about these ones too. But later on, so in the summer, 8 to 8:30 is going to be quite late into the morning. So that means that there will be a lot of activity earlier on, because it's generally around an hour after sunrise that the most activity happens, which is why at the moment it's happening after my period, because sunrise is about 7:45 or something at the moment. But I guess over the year you'll get those fluctuations. So what I'm asking, I guess, is, it's right, isn't it? I should just stick to that time period and not be tempted to keep fluctuating, or an hour earlier or half an hour later.
It's to be honest, it's a rough guide. So we ask you to be reasonably consistent. I would actually be more consistent with, so I wouldn't worry too much about the exact time of dawn.
Right.
But I would actually go with the daylight hours. So kind of how just because that is biologically how birds work. So it's things like you don't need to be so exact that you are half an hour after dawn, after sunrise each day or something. That you don't necessarily need to do that. But I would actually go with the daylight hours, and the reason being is things like do you put the food out at a particular time? Then I would make sure that I either record before or after I put the food out. And it's the same kind of idea here. But as you say, it is a sample. So what you're doing is you're being reasonably consistent from week to week, and it's a sample of your garden birds. And as you say, over a long period of time, that gives us a very good indication of what's going on in your garden. I realised that I completely forgot to say that with Garden Birdwatch, we also do record some other wildlife as well. So your data doesn't just go towards the BTO, which of course is very important for us to learn more about the birds, but we also work with other organisations. So we do collect information on butterflies, mammals, dragonflies, and also reptiles and amphibians as well, and bumblebees. And we work with other organisations to provide that data. So butterfly conservation for the butterfly data, ARG and ARC for the reptile and amphibian data. So the records really do go somewhere, and they really are used.
Well, what I'll do is I'll put the links to the BTO Garden Birdwatch in our show notes so people can find that. And if you'd just like to give us the website anyway, that would be great.
Yes, it's www.bto.org/GBW.
Fantastic. But thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate speaking with you.
Thank you very much.
We feed garden birds primarily for our own enjoyment, but also in the hope that we can help the birds through difficult times. Putting appropriate foods out in your garden, along with fresh water, will encourage birds to visit more frequently, and you will know that you are providing beneficial supplements to their regular food sources. But, as Claire advised, we need to be responsible in what we provide and in keeping the feeding areas clean and safe for the birds. During this festive season, the RSPB echoes what Claire said about the type of fat to feed birds. Don't put out turkey fat or dripping from the festive meal. The fat is not solid at room temperature and can damage feathers by reducing their waterproofing and insulating qualities. They say you may give small amounts of leftover Christmas cake and mince pies, if there is any left over. But why not make your own bird cake? Here's a great recipe from the RSPB for doing just that. Take a block of hard fat, like store-bought lard or suet. Mix in birdseed, raisins and unsalted nuts. Press the mixture around a pine cone. Hang it from a tree with string, and you have a food source that will appeal to the acrobatic tit family. Or place one on a mesh ground feeder tray and allow the blackbirds, robins and dunnocks to also enjoy your creation. The Audubon Society recommends only putting suet out during the winter when it's less likely to melt and turn rancid, and in the summer changing to a blend of 1 part peanut butter and 5 parts cornmeal. Some general tips on where to place your feeders. Different species feed in different ways, and if you have the space, it's a good idea to provide feeders at different levels. Generally, blackbirds, sparrows and robins feed on the ground, so providing a small raised mesh ground feeder is ideal for them. For North American listeners, this type of feeder also suits towhees and juncos. You can buy specialist seed mixes which include dried mealworms and fruit, or treat them with some raisins that have been soaked overnight in water, and maybe some grated mild cheese. Greenfinches and goldfinches will take seed from hanging tube feeders. I provide sunflower hearts in my feeders as I found that, even though this is a more expensive seed, there is less waste and any seed that's dropped is quickly eaten by the ground-feeding birds. Suet feeders are great for the different tits, or chickadees in North America, woodpeckers and nuthatches, if you're lucky enough to have them visit in your garden. For those of you who do not live in the UK, do check with your country's birding society about their recommendations regarding feeding wild birds. Kate, from Pups and PopCulture podcast, lives in Australia, and she told me that Australian birding groups discourage feeding on the basis that it creates dependency in the birds by changing their regular foraging behaviour, and that bringing lots of bird species together at feeders increases the chance of spreading disease. If you want to attract birds to your garden but don't want to provide feeding stations, a longer-term approach is to plant species that provide food naturally, and always make sure fresh, clean water is available. As I mentioned to Claire, I have a variety of food in my garden right now, and in this last week I've had the following birds visiting. Blackbirds, they love the chopped apples and grapes I put out. Goldfinches, greenfinches, house sparrows, blue tits, great tits, robins and dunnocks were all eating the sunflower seeds in the tube feeders. Magpies, rooks, starlings, blue tits and great tits visited the coconut shell filled with fattened seeds, and collared doves and wood pigeons ate any dropped seed. I asked listeners what birds they were seeing and what food they've put out. On Twitter, Christy said, "In Wisconsin, I have apples halved, black sunflower seeds, mixed seeds and Niger seed for blue jays, goldfinches, juncos, chickadees, mourning doves, cardinals, downy woodpeckers, etc. Oh, and a single nuthatch." Susan, host of the podcast The Dead Ladies Show, is currently in South Florida. She said she saw male and female cardinals, red-winged blackbirds and mourning doves at the feeder eating seed. From the Casual Birder Facebook group, Daisy from Nanaimo on Vancouver Island in Canada told me, "This week my feeder has had chestnut-backed chickadees, a sweet flock of bush tits that comes by every hour or so, northern flickers, numerous dark-eyed juncos, spotted towhees, house finches, fox sparrows, song sparrows, and too many house sparrows, and Anna's hummingbirds. The highlight of my week was an American goldfinch that came 2 days in a row. And I feed the birds whole sunflower chips and suet." Ewan, the Edinburgh birdwatcher, posted some photos and a video of a great spotted woodpecker eating suet in his garden. And Mark from Texas said that he provides peanuts, sunflower seed, corn chunks and standard feed, and he has had visiting 2 different red-headed woodpeckers, ground dove, blue jays, cardinals, and a bird that's reddish on its front chest and head but looks like a sparrow, and we later worked out that might be a housefinch. Thank you to everyone who sent in their sightings. If you want to find out more about the birds mentioned in the show, visit rspb.org.uk for birds found in the UK and audubon.org for North American birds. If you're taking part in the Audubon Christmas bird count, do let us know what birds you were particularly excited to see. The RSPB's Big Garden Birdwatch will be taking place in January. We'll be talking about this more in a future episode, but you can sign up for your free birdwatch pack by visiting rspb.org.uk. I'd love to know what birds you've seen this week, and whether you also put food out in your garden. Join our Facebook group to discuss this week's episode, or post your photos of the birds you've seen. I really do enjoy hearing your tales, so come and join the conversation there. Find us at facebook.com/groups/Casual Birder Podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Casual Birder Pod or on Instagram at Casual Birder Podcast. You can email me at casualbirderpod@gmail.com. Make sure you don't miss any episodes by subscribing to the show. Subscribing is free and you can do it wherever you listen to the show. And if you enjoy the show, please talk about it on social media. It really does help others to find it. Thank you to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. And check out their website at www.dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder Podcast.